My grandfather, Jens Christensen, was from Denmark. And unfortunately, he had a little problem with liquor. He was an alcoholic. Much to Grandma's dismay. Grandma would dump any bottle of liquor she found that he had hidden. So he got to where he hid him really good. But she'd just dump it out. What a waste. Grandpa had a job that wasn't quite legal. His job was to transport liquor to Gualala. There was a boat that would come in from Canada to what's called Black Point, which now is full of sea ranch, filthy rich houses. And he would take this rowboat out and meet with the boat and load it up with the bottles or boxes of bottles of booze. One time he claimed that a huge octopus wrapped a tentacle around each side of his boat. We finally realized later that it could not have been an octopus that only put one on each side of his boat. It was a rowboat, so it wasn't that big. But what it really was a giant squid. So, this one time, it was late in the season, and late in the, I guess you'd call it the end almost of Prohibition. Grandpa loaded his bottles up and put them in his horse's wagon and rode his horse up to Gualala, where someone would come across the river and pick them up. And then he did whatever they gave him. I don't know what they gave him. But one time they gave him a whole box of his own bottles of booze. And so he was thrilled shitless. Well, it was 8 miles from Gualala back to where Grandpa lived. So he was thrilled shitless, pardon my mouth. He was drunk, let's face it. He was so drunk by the time he got back down to the ranch. Thank God the horse knew the way. He hid the bottles in the swamp. Now, there was a swamp that was created by the 1906 earthquake, the biggie. And what it did, okay, let's see if I can explain this to you. It did that. It lifted parts up and parts dropped down. So there ended up being these, and they filled full of water because they couldn't drain out, so they became swamps. So he hid it in the swamp, in the hollow bowl of the redwood tree that was covered by a big fern. And he knew Grandma would never find it there. What he didn't know is that he would never find it there. The reason I know this story is because the people at the cemetery and the church where all our family is buried up in Annapolis had asked if they could pick ferns for the church. They were doing a big thing with ferns. And of course we gave them permission to go and do that. Well, I personally never realized there was not only the swamp below me, I mean, below me, below the great-grandma's house on the street, but also up, way up to the north part, no, that would be the south part. To the south part of the ranch, there was also one. And that's where they were picking ferns. And they looked up above, because it was downhill, of course, because it was the drop part, and they saw copper pipes sticking out of the hill. Well, they, of course, assumed it was a still. So they, of course, being good church people, turned my grandpa in as a bootlegger. And they called the revenuers, etc. Well, the good news was my father had a lot of bar businesses, so he was very well acquainted with the revenuers. He had a lot of licenses to run bars. And so he went down and talked to, and he told them the story about Grandpa and his lost booze, because Grandpa had solicited his help for 15 years trying to find that bottles of booze, and never did. So Daddy told them the story to the revenuers, and they realized the truth in it. It's not one of Daddy's wallopers. It was true. And he tried so hard to buy just one of those bottles from the revenuers. He offered them $1,000 for one bottle. He just wanted it because of the story, of the fact that he had searched for it for 15 years, all of that. I mean, it was priceless to him. But they wouldn't sell it at any cost. Would not sell it one. Broke his heart. However, that was one of the real stories that sounded far-fetched that my daddy used to tell.